Chairman Zwanitzer, we are live now.
All right, good afternoon, Corporations Committee. First, I guess since the last year, let's welcome back Representative LeBeau, who we missed for a part of the interim, but happy as of this morning to be put back on the committee. And we thank Representative Yin, who decided not to even come today, for his service. He, I know, is drawing redistricting maps and getting ready for this afternoon. Also, we would like to welcome Representative Burt from Sweetwater County to Corporations. He's replacing Representative Hans Hunt. And he was appointed about 3 hours ago to be on this committee, replacing Representative Greer, who for the interim was a member of our committee. So with that, welcome back, Barb, for a second year with us. If you'd call the roll, we'll get started.
Representative Blackburn. Representative Clausen.
Here.
Representative Duncan. Here. Representative Ayer.
Here.
Representative Burt. Representative McGuire is excused. Representative Roscoe. Representative LeBeau. Chairman Zwanitzer.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, committee, first up today is House Bill 62 Insurance Amendments, and we're pleased to be joined by the Department of Insurance. Welcome, Commissioner Rude. Would you like to walk us through House Bill 62?
Chairman Zwanitzer, I would be happy to have someone do that for us. But first, let me introduce Ms. Johnson, the Deputy Commissioner, and with us is our licensing supervisor, Brian Stevens. And before Mr. Stevens goes through the bill, I just want to explain why you have before you a large amendment. At the Sheridan meeting, we presented the bill and we were asking for a change on some language involving licensing adjusters from and to or. And industry had concerns at that time. And we were asked if we could get with them and come up with some acceptable language. And after public comment was made, the committee actually did the reverse. They went from or to and. And that's the bill that was passed out of committee. The result of changing the or to the and upon review, it would actually result in approximately $6 million annual loss to the general fund, because licensing of adjusters would go down, as most would then become appraisers. So what we've done since then is we've gotten with industry and we've come to an agreement with the following amendment. We've got language proposed to you, which will take care of that. It will allay our concerns in having the terminology clear, and it wouldn't have the impact on the general fund. And then once again, industry, we got with them and we followed a bill out of another state, and we're both in agreement that it's the best way to proceed. And so what we'll do is we'll have Mr. Stevens run through the bill as drafted, and then we'll walk you through amendments whenever you want them. That sound fair?
Certainly sounds fair, Commissioner Rude. Welcome, Mr. Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Take it away.
All right, so thank you again, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. This bill is just some cleanup language in the producer licensing section, which is 26.9. Section 1 deals with the changing of and or in the definition of adjuster that the commissioner just summarized for us, and that is the section we do have an amendment prepared for.
And hey, Mr. Stevens, slightly an unorthodox question. Do you have talking points? I know insurance bills get interesting on the floor. I'm just making sure I haven't assigned it to one of the committee members yet. But my question for you is, how good of notes would you like one of us to take, or are you comfortable turning over your notes to one of us to present on the floor?
I would be happy to turn over some talking points to any representative that would like it.
Okay, appreciate it. Go ahead.
Section 2, this deals with changing of fee schedules. So the first section here deals with surplus lines brokers, and the intent of all of this is to make sure that residents are paying a $100 licensing fee and non-residents are paying a $150 licensing fee. As it stands right now, some non-residents are paying $100. We feel that this was an oversight when the legislation was drafted, and we are simply making sure that it's consistent across all license types. So we are changing that for surplus lines brokers, insurance consultants, and I thought there were 3, sorry. So surplus lines brokers and insurance consultants. We are also adding fees for continuing education. We are looking at moving the burden of continuing education fees off of our Wyoming resident producers and onto the companies that they pay for their continuing education. The proposed fees are $100 for a continuing education provider and $50 for each course offered. Starting on line 17 on page 5, we are making sure that every license type is subject to a waiver for military service or long-term disability. We want to make sure that they are all required to provide email addresses, as that is our primary form of communication at the department. And we want to make sure that all license types are required to report actions at the same time and in the same way. Moving to 269202, these are our updates to continuing education. We are defining continuing education provider. We are also adding a definition for public adjuster. It is used in both statute and regulation and has not been defined anywhere. We are taking this from NAIC model language. And we are defining licensee to make sure that all licensees are treated equally within the code. 269207, we are adding that licensee language instead of singling out certain license types. If we go to line 13 on page 8, we're doing the same. Line 6 on page 9, we're doing the same. And line 17 on page 9, we are adding the email address requirement for all license types. On page 10, on lines 2 and 11, we are updating that licensee language instead of specific license types. And when we get down to line 17 on page 10, these are our continuing education updates. This provides a method for us to receive application and approval for continuing education providers. It sets the renewal period for continuing education providers for every 2 years on the last day of the month of approval. And it sets the same standards for course approvals and renewals.
Is it 2 years an industry standard?
Yes, it is.
I guess I should ask, is this NAIC model legislation that we're dealing with, or these are more what we'd call home cooking specific to Wyoming statutes?
They're based on statutes of other states. We are currently one of maybe 2 states that requires producers to pay the continuing education fees rather than the continuing education providers. We feel it is more fair for the providers to pay these fees as the producers are paying them for the classes. We feel like it's unfair to double charge the producers.
All right, sorry for stopping you. Go ahead.
And that is it.
Committee questions? Mr. Stevens? Not seeing anything, Ms. Johnson or Commissioner Rude? Wasn't covered? Just happy to have you up at the front table, isn't it? All right, no questions from anyone. We'll see if there's any public comment. Anything further, Commissioner Department?
We will be ready to go over the amendment when you are ready for us.
Committee, do you want to hear the amendment now or you want public comment first? Sure, while you're here, let's talk about the amendment. Go ahead.
All right. So the amendment, which Deputy Commissioner Johnson emailed out to most of you, and you should have received from LSO staff. I do have color copies if you would like them. This all deals with section 1, where the and/or language for adjusters was changed. So as the commissioner stated, we sat down with our industry partners and came to a conclusion that was amicable to all parties. We all agree on this and think that it will make very clear who is and is not an adjuster and is not burdensome to the industry. So on 261102 section A, we are changing the definition of adjuster to mean any individual who either investigates and negotiates settlements relative to a claim or applies the factual circumstances of a claim under policy provisions, or both arising under property and casualty insurance contracts. That definition is updated in Chapter 1 of Title 26. It is also updated in Chapter 9 of Title 26. We are adding definitions for appraiser and umpire, which show up under property and casualty contracts. These are typically used in the dispute of claims where both sides can hire an appraiser and an umpire is the go-between to settle the claim. 26.9.219. That also updates the definition of an adjuster to be consistent with the other definitions proposed in this amendment.
No questions, committee. An umpire is a standard industry term
Yes,
in
it
this
is.
regard. Okay. Any other questions on the amendment committee? I'm sure you will hear from our industry partners and hoping they will echo the same sentiment here momentarily. I guess if there's no further questions from the committee at this time, we'll call up some other people and don't go too far. With that, good neighbor, would you like to come forward? And I think you appeared first at our last meeting, so I try to rotate appropriately. With that, Ms. Shaner, welcome. We're happy to have you here in Cheyenne and not Virginia, or anywhere else.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you. Mary Ann Shaner on behalf of State Farm Insurance. And we do agree and appreciate working with the department on this proposed amendment. So we are in support of the proposed amendment in the bill.
Any questions, committee? All right.
Thank
Easy
you.
enough. Thank you. No. Any other public comment on House Bill 62? Any online?
Mr. Chairman, no one has their hand raised at the moment.
Okay. Mr. Hauk, you're good? Okay, seeing no further public comment. Committee, what's your pleasure on House Bill 62? Moved by Duncan, seconded by Blackburn. Bill is on the table. We can go page by page, or if anyone has any amendments they'd like to offer, I would entertain them at this time. Representative Duncan.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move as a whole in its entirety the suggested amendment by the Department of Insurance.
Seconded by Blackburn, again moved by Duncan. Any further questions regarding the amendment committee? They seem to be pretty standard terms and agreed upon. Okay, seeing no discussion. All in favor of the amendment, please say aye. Opposed, say no. That amendment's passed. We're back on House Bill 62. Any further amendments? Any discussion on House Bill 62? Seeing none and question being called multiple times. Barb, if you would call the roll.
Representative Blackburn. Representative Clausen. Representative Duncan. Vice Chairman Air.
Aye.
Representative Burt.
Aye.
Representative McGuire voted aye in an absentee form. Representative Roscoe. Representative LeBeau. Representative Swanitzer.
Aye,
9 ayes.
I know. And we'll give it to Representative Burt to floor manage. Okay. I'm happy to carry it, committee. How about I take House Bill 62 on the floor, only because the next 3 bills are election issues, and I think I may stay away from those for a while. All right, seeing no further comment or discussion on House Bill 62, we will see. I expect it up tomorrow, probably in committee of the whole. So, and Mr. Stevens, if you'd give me some talking points or anything other information I might need, I would be appreciative. With that, committee, let's go to, I'm looking at who's in the room. Maybe we should go to House Bill 52, since I see the county clerks here. Is the Secretary of State's office online? We got to that first one a little fast, so maybe we can start on House Bill 52, the timeline to prepare and process absentee ballots.
Well, hands up.
Mr. Chairman, we do have them online and I'm moving them over now.
Oh. Well, while you're here, Ms. Langford, we'll still do House Bill 52 next. Come on down. And so committee, House Bill 52 was brought to us I think jointly from the county clerks and somewhat the Secretary of State after the 2020 election with the large amount of absentee ballots that came in on putting stuff more in statutory code than having the Secretary of State do emergency authorizations. And so with that, for a primer and reminder on House Bill 52, welcome, Ms. Langford.
Mike. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and committee. If you'll recall, we brought our information and we did a
You'd
demonstration.
remind us who you are just for
Oh, I'm
process.
sorry. I'm Mary Langford, and I have the honor to represent the Wyoming County Clerks Association. And with me today, and I don't know if he's here yet, will be Malcolm Irwin, the Platte County Clerk, as well as the President of the County Clerks Association, and there may also be others. But I think they were planning on being on the last of the agenda, so we'll see if they show up or not. But okay, flashback to August. If you'll recall, we came to Joint Corporations in Sheridan and we presented a demonstration to you on what preparation and processing of ballots would be like as proposed for this bill. So I have a few comments to go with that and a few talking points, and I'll walk through that. It's our purpose today to focus on the administration of Wyoming elections. Wyoming elections have integrity and are well run due to the dedication of 23 county clerks and their staff, with hundreds of committed volunteers and the support of state and local elected officials. The clerks developed this bill, asked your group to sponsor it, as we saw that we had a need for statutory support for processing absentee ballots. Voting by absentee is a choice. Unlike some states, these ballots are not sent to each registered voter. A voter must be currently registered and specifically request an absentee ballot to receive a ballot. That voter must provide certain information to corroborate their registration record. The people of Wyoming continue to choose to obtain an absentee ballot to cast their vote. In the 2020 general election, 46% of the ballots cast in Wyoming were absentees. That is 143,000 ballots. And we had a record high of votes of 278,000 votes were cast in the general election. 46% of those were absentee. In 2018, 27% of our absentees were, or 27% of the votes cast were absentees as well. We've been watching a trend that has started from about 2008 of 23% of our ballots being cast absentee, up to a high of 28%, which was in the 2018 election. The 2016 election, which was a presidential election as well. But all-time high was the 2020 election. In 2020, the Secretary of State issued an emergency directive allowing counties to process election ballots prior to Election Day and provided rules for that processing. There were no issues, election complaints, or concerns of impropriety were received because of that early processing. The language of House Bill 52 is identical to that directive given by the Secretary of State. This is local option. This does not require any clerk in the state to use this method. During the 2020 general election, Laramie County received 27,498 absentee ballots, but Platte County received 2,009. Laramie County processed early, Platte County did not. Of the 27,498 ballots that were received in Laramie County, 11,000 of those ballots were in the Laramie County Clerk's office on the Thursday before Election Day. In 2020, 14 counties used the directive that was issued by the Secretary of State and utilized the additional time that was provided by that directive. 9 counties did not. Additional costs were incurred for judges and hours worked by all counties on just absentee ballots. Local control and local elected officials will determine what is best for their constituency with this bill. In 2022, if Wyoming voters cast absentee ballots at a rate similar to 2020, some county clerks will need that option in order to deliver results on election night. Wyoming is accustomed to seeing results on election night that encompass all votes cast at polling places and all votes cast by absentee ballots. To ensure those same types of results are delivered on election night, this process may be a necessity in some counties. In 2020, the narrative concerned vote dumps after Election Day. That's exactly what it would look like if we were unable to process all ballots and were required to process absentee ballots after Election Day. Timeline for election week is tight. Tuesday's Election Day. Wednesday, we collect equipment, balance, and begin recounting if required. Thursday is post-election audit. We examine poll books and troubleshoot any questions or issues that arose. Friday, the counties canvass and they certify their election results. Again, in 2018, 28% of the state voted absentee. House Bill 52 provides for notification to the Secretary of State's office and political parties of when preparation and processing will occur. That notice includes information on in-person observation of the process. It will be a public process. No results are known until the polls close at 7 p.m. on Election Day. And if you'll recall, we had quite a discussion about anyone knowing what the results were of the early processing of the ballots. The safest place for a ballot is to be secured within the ballot box after it's been scanned by a tabulator. This ensures that the ballot is not lost or damaged prior to processing. The sooner an absentee envelope can be processed and the ballot tabulated, the better. The preparation and processing of absentee ballots is done by at least 3 election judges and is done in such a way that no judge knows how a single voter cast a ballot. The process is open, transparent, and safe. The best way to verify that processing absentee ballots early or on Election Day is safe and secure is to watch it or to serve as an election judge on an absentee board. With that, we thank you for considering to sponsor our bill. We thank you for your time today, and I'm happy to stand for any questions.
All right, any questions for the Clerks Association? Representative Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Langford, do you have any inclination or any way to estimate that whether or not the level that we saw in 2020 will continue going forward? Or is that just a COVID-related event that may not be repeated again?
Mr. Chairman and
Ms. Langford.
Representative Eric, just thinking about it with my experience, I think that we are seeing an upward trend of absentee voting. I don't know that we'll see 46% again, because there wasn't quite an effort to encourage folks to vote absentee if they were concerned about any kinds of issues with COVID. But the other thing is people have now had the experience of voting absentee, and they may decide that that's their choice of how they want to vote, as opposed to, taking time off to go to the polls, or, there's quite a few folks in the state of Wyoming that work on Election Day and they do vote absentee or whatever. So, but I don't know if I can't really say 46, but I think we need to be mindful that we could possibly be counting half of our election based on absentee ballots. It's a potential out there.
Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Langford, in the last election, we even had, because of COVID issues, we had some drop boxes right in front of like the courthouse and things like that. Do you foresee that we're going to continue with anything like that? Or are we going to go back to turning them inside versus like drive by or anything like that? I know there's some concerns in some of the public for that.
Ms. Langford.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Duncan, drop boxes have been used in the past, and actually fairly successfully, with rules as far as security is concerned. They need to be secured, they need to be lighted, they need to be dumped regularly, those kinds of things, different rules that have been set up for those. And I think one of our biggest concerns in Wyoming is our mail. And if you're doing absentee voting, the mail component is a really big deal. And I live in Sublette County and my mail goes to Salt Lake first. And you don't get mail overnight at home. That's a real concern. It always has been a concern because you want to make sure those ballots get in and they don't get it hung up because they don't count after 7 o'clock on election day. Unlike some other places, they're done at 7 o'clock. They can show up at the clerk's office during that day and be included in the count. But we have a hard set time for when it's over. But drop boxes have been helpful. They've been useful. They've got to be secure. They've got to be available. And I know that there are concerns about that and I don't know if it's necessary that they be a lot of, there'll be a lot of them around the county. Maybe it's one at the courthouse or whatever, but yeah.
Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just to remind those that are new to the committee and those that are listening in that weren't here this summer, we did in this bill put in some fail safes for punishment for those who happen to look at the ballot and disclose and things. Would you remind us about those penalties or those that part of the bill that because there was some fear when we talked about the introduction, trying to get this bill introduced, there was some negative comments about the potential of people looking at the ballots and disclosing the results prior to. So if you could update us on those penalties and things for those that are new to the committee.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Duncan, yes. If you'll recall, we had quite a discussion about that information. The bill originally came out that the clerks would have that information available to them. And the clerks pushed back pretty hard and said, we don't want to know. Please don't make that information available to us until election night because we don't want that responsibility. We want it secure and safe and taken care of, but we don't want numbers. If you'll look on the bill on page 4, I believe it is 22-26-112. It talks about the misdemeanor offenses and the penalties. There's $1,000 fine, 6 months in jail. And then there are also, I have to look at my election code quickly. That talks about any violations to 22-9125D4, which is earlier in the bill. And it says, if I may, no results of absentee ballots prepared and processed under this section shall be known, printed, released, or provided to any person, and the results shall not be incorporated into the final vote count in any manner until after the polls close on election day.
Good. Other questions? Okay, go ahead, Representative Bear.
You mentioned a hard and fast cutoff on 7 p.m. on election day.
Mm-hmm.
Is that in statute or is that just your regulation?
It's in statute. When the polls close, the election's over.
And if the mail gets delivered once a day at 8 a.m., every ballot after that doesn't get counted. I do have a question though. Page 3, it's Romanet 3, when we talk about candidate or campaign committee chairman or treasurers can't actually be allowed to observe the preparation processing unless they're also a precinct committeeman or committeewoman. Is that a current practice? It just seems really odd to me that we'd let a candidate watch the opening of ballots just because they're a precinct committee person. Where's that come from?
Mr. Chairman, I have to honestly tell you, I don't know where that came from. It's not currently in the statutes. Our counting boards, which is what the folks are called that deal with absentee ballots, are generally just voters, registered voters in the county. They're nobody special. Everybody's special, yeah. But the other part of that is that these are open to the public. The counting board activity is open to the public, traditionally held in the courthouse on election day. so the public can come and watch the election judges work. I don't know what that is. Sorry.
No problem. Other questions for the clerks? Not seeing any yet, Ms. Langford. Any other county clerks online? Or actually, if anybody's online for this bill, we could just pull them into the room and bounce around. Not sure if anybody has their hand raised or not. Nope. Okay. Anyone else in the room? Mr. Winnie, welcome. Thanks, Ms. Langford. Don't go too far. Or you're welcome to stay there if you'd like. Welcome, Mr. Winnie.
Mr. Chairman, Bill Winnie, Sublette County. Mary Langford handled many of my absentee ballots across a career on active duty. I think these timelines are very important because your active duty military can be filing from long distant places. Like I've filed from Yokosuka, Japan, or La Maddalena, Sardinia, things like that. And the way the Navy mail works is they accumulate it in a bag, and when your ship comes in, they throw the bag at your ship. So it might sit in a bag for a while, depending. We've had ships that have been at sea. Submarines, when they go out, can be out for like 2 or 3 months. It is incumbent on the member to get it in early, and I did. It also serves to register the active duty people, because the federal postcard application has to be signed off by either the ship's administrative officer or commissioned officer. I never had a problem with the submitting the absentee ballots. The member does have to pay attention to the elections, which I did. But like I said, the active duty military guys, the timelines can be fairly long. So subject to your questions, thank you very much.
Questions for Mr. Winnie? Not seeing any. Thank you much, Bill. Other people want to testify?
Mr. Chairman, we do have one online.
Sure.
From the Secretary of State's office.
That'd be great.
They can just turn on their video. They're ready.
Welcome, Mr. Show, to corporations. Good to see you.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, committee. Kai Schoen, Election Director in the Secretary of State's office. I meant to raise my hand a little bit sooner. I had to attend to something just on the side there for a minute. I just wanted to just start by echoing everything that Ms. Langford had said. This bill certainly does preserve the transparency of the process. It is again verbatim to the directive that we worked with the counties on in 2020. That was large and in part due to COVID and allowing the counties to be able to process the influx that Ms. Langford already gave the numbers on. And so the way this process is listed in there, again, it is open to the public. It has those penalties put in there to protect it as well. And so it is a bill that our office does support the clerks on. And I would certainly answer any questions that the committee may have for me.
Questions for the State Election Director? Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Schoen, we've had the benefit of a test run kind of with this rule, with this statute, which was an emergency rule for the 2020 election. Did you see any hint of any lack of integrity or increased chance of fraud or early release of results or anything that might bring into question the results of our election in any way with this test run that we had in 2020?
Go ahead, Mr. Schoen.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Bear, thank you for that question. And so the way it took place in 2020, there was no hint of any issues that were taking place. Again, it was very public. It was a transparent process. In fact, even in Laramie County, it was being televised. And so you could actually stream it and watch it. Granted, it was kind of like watching paint dry, but nonetheless, you could see every step of the process. So it was very secure. It was very open. It was protected. And certainly our county clerks, as it relates to security of elections, take that to heart probably more than most others. And so did not have any issues with that. And that's also why we do support them with this bill.
Other questions for Mr. Schoen? Representative LeBeau.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Schoen, welcome. I have a concern that the good chairman brought up too on page 3, lines 13 through 17. The issue with the candidate or candidates committee chairperson or treasurer and the precinct committee man or committee woman. And I just have a concern that that's a possible conflict. And I just want to know your take on that piece of the legislation. Thank you.
Mr. Schoen, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Bo. So as far as those lines 13 through 17 on page 3, similar to, as Mary Langford alluded to, that was part of the conversation. I don't remember all of it. I do know that there was a perceived, conflict in having candidates potentially observing, seeing their own results, that were coming in. And this process generally, as it relates to poll workers or election workers, is always a bipartisan effort. And so if they were already involved with, the party and their precinct committee people, it would lend to have them be a part of that process and more appropriate. And I think that may have been a lot of that discussion.
Follow up, that good? So Mr. Schoen, is that allowed now? If you're a election judge or a ballot processor, it's okay if you're a candidate?
Mr. Chairman, there's no provision in the law that speaks to it. It's silent.
Representative Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Schoen, so on that topic, if I'm a candidate and a precinct person, I can observe the way this is written. But the average citizen, the way this is written, the average citizen shouldn't, there's two different criteria there. The average citizen can go and he can observe or help or count. A candidate or a candidates committee has to be a precinct person to go and count, or not count, go and observe. Is that right? Am I reading that correctly?
Mr. Schoen?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Blackburn, that is how this does read. The way that I read it, I see it the same as you.
So let me follow up then. Has there ever been a complaint that you know of to a county clerk or the Secretary of State's office that a candidate was serving in one of these capacities? Actually, I guess we are tightening it up because it's silent right now, but it does seem interesting we would have ever allowed it. Any complaints you've ever heard, or from county clerks either, about allowing candidates or their campaign people to also be precinct, well, they can be precinct people, but also be election workers?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So let me clarify. So there is provisions in our law as well as in our rules that would prevent a candidate from serving as a poll worker at a polling place within the precinct in which they are on the ballot. So there is that provision that is in there. But outside of that, there's nothing else that would speak to a candidate serving as an election worker outside of their precinct in a place of which they were not on the ballot.
Representative Blackburn, follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Schoen, so would it be better if we just wrote in there that candidates can't do any of this?
Thoughts, Mr. Schoen, on removing those words or sections?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Blackburn, I don't have any heartburn on that. That would really be a decision for the committee to make, unless anyone from the county clerks or Ms. Langford anything to say to that. I'd say that would be up to how the committee wants to handle that language.
Keep going.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So would that be helpful to the Secretary of State's office?
Thoughts, Mr. Schoen? If you don't think it makes a difference to your office, most of the complaints would probably go to the local county clerk or election official, I would assume, and wouldn't be sent up to you, nor would you really be observing or responsible for how each county conducted their election. Would that generally be true?
Mr. Chairman, yes, you're correct.
While we're on that, if you'd like Ms. Langford to comment, we'll bring you back.
Mr. Chairman, through my experience is what I can probably talk to you about. We were always careful that we did not want candidates sitting in polling places because of the look of impropriety and the opportunity to campaign that day. And we also didn't want their campaign committees or their grandmothers or their spouses or anybody else there because of any claim of impropriety. So I think it falls onto that it's like, geez, you aren't going to have the candidates sitting there running the election. And as far as watching the ballots go, probably the same thing. You don't want the candidates watching the election all day long. There are other folks in there that in the community or in their, in their campaign committee that could look at that, but not the candidates and not their leadership in their campaigns.
Yep, go ahead, Reverend Blackburn.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, but I don't remember how we got to this verbiage in this bill, and I apologize. Maybe somebody on this committee can remember why we did this. And maybe we need to think, from what you're saying, we need to redo this, rethink it, or get rid of it. Trash can.
Ms. Langford, do you have a strong sense on it either way?
I don't have a strong sense on it either way. I think that the purpose or the intent is to try to make sure that we didn't have inappropriate folks there during the processing. There's probably better language.
Representative Bear?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Ms. Langford, you said you didn't have any problem with the candidate, or you didn't allow candidates to be poll workers or be in the polling place.
Right.
Did you ever have one try to be there?
Ms. Langford, do you know?
And is that just your own, the county clerks just did that on their own, or is that I think Kaishon mentioned that it's kind of moved in the statutes.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Ayer, I think that's exactly right. It is fairly movement. I'm thinking of my experience again. I never really had anyone approach me with that. I think of, I would have commissioners' wives that were election judges, and they would sit out those elections because they didn't want to sit there and have folks come in and say, well, geez, how come you get to sit here and work the polls and that type of thing? They don't want that scrutiny. So that's been my experience. It's always been fairly easy. I haven't had to chase anybody out.
Okay, Reverend Clausen, do you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Langford, so what if we just remove the portion that was, unless the person is also a precinct committee member, committee woman? I think that would be a good move to make this a little better and follow current practice.
Thoughts as you're hearing some mumblings up here of deleting that sentence or maybe the entire paragraph? You can think about it for a second, and if the bill moves, we'll ask for an amendment at the appropriate time and keep discussing. Other questions? We're technically still in the Secretary of State's office. Is Mr. Schoen still up there? Maybe. Any further questions for Kai? All right, just want to make sure. Thank you, Elections Director. Any other public comment on this bill? Anyone else online? Not seeing any. Oh, Representative LeBeau.
I'm so sorry. So forgive me, but if somebody wanted to protest anything, like what's the protest, candidate to protest or average citizen to protest, what's that process? Is it gonna take care of if we leave this paragraph in there? Is it gonna resolve it? Is it gonna help it, or is it gonna make it worse?
I think those are all great questions. And I'm not sure there is an answer as we think through these issues on this committee, how that would work, but I'm legitimate, right? Further public comment? Not seeing any, nothing online. Public comment will be closed. Committee, what's your pleasure on House Bill 52, moved by Blackburn, seconded by Roscoe? Any amendments committee? Go ahead, Representative Blackburn.
Page 3,
Mike.
13.
I'm sorry.
So page 3, line 13, or line 14, I guess, after treasurer, strike everything on line 14 and 13 to shall. And we'll put shall not be allowed. Does that work? Shall not be allowed to observe the preparation, processing, etc.
So again, after the word treasurer on line 14, delete everything on 14 and 15 up through the comma. So it
Right.
would read, no candidate or candidates committee chairperson or treasurer shall be allowed to observe the preparation.
That's correct.
Is there a second? Seconded by Roscoe. Further discussion on that amendment committee?
Question.
Representative Duncan, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I like where he's going, but I think we could just delete the whole thing. Yeah, I just don't think no one should be having to do with a candidate or anybody should be.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative Blackburn.
Mr. Chairman, if we do that, then that says, that will say then that the candidate and the candidates, people can do what we don't want them to do. We have to have that in there to keep that individual or individuals from observing the process.
Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of that amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. That amendment's passed. Back on the bill. Further discussion or amendments committee? Not seeing any further comment from the committee and question being called. Barb, if you would call the roll on House Bill 52.
Representative Blackburn.
No, I'm sorry.
Aye. He did say that first, didn't he? Clausen,
Yes.
Representative Clausen, sorry. Representative Duncan.
Aye.
Vice Chairman Air.
Aye.
Representative Greer. Oh,
Absent.
Sorry, Bert. Representative Bert. Representative McGuire. Oh, and he had an absentee of aye. Representative Roscoe. Representative LeBeau. Chairman Zwaniter.
Aye. And so Representative Blackburn, as a person who moved the bill do pass, would you like to manage this on the floor?
No, but I will.
I like that enthusiasm. All right,
I have to.
we'll mark House Bill 52 down to Representative Blackburn. Thank you to people who came to listen to that bill. Next up, we're going to go to, we can do House Bill 49. I assume our elections director is still with us. Mr. Schoen, are you here for House Bill 49? Anybody else from the Secretary of State's office or online? You're not here for 49, right, Ms. Langford? There he is. Welcome back, Director Schoen. We're now on House Bill 49, the Election Reporting Requirements Bill. And so basically this goes through and talks about independent expenditures and electioneering communications, increases some penalties and some timelines, and further delineates really what is an organization that falls under our statutes. And we're trying to kind of bring in a wider net, I guess I would say, to stop any kind of bad actors in our campaign practices. And if they exist, at least we will be able to understand where the money is coming from. So with that, House Bill 49, Director Schoen, thoughts?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, Kai Schoen, Election Director, Secretary of State's Office. So House Bill 49, you summarized that well. It's certainly a bill that provides a more streamlined process that will assist organizations with meeting their statutory filing obligations that already exist in current law. And at the same time, again, providing greater transparency to the public on who these organizations are, either before or shortly after an electioneering communication or independent expenditure is made. This bill achieves this through the requirement for organizations as defined within the bill to form within 10 days of causing those independent expenditures or electioneering communications to be made that are in excess of $1,000. In organizations, as we know, they are uniquely different. They don't function like a PAC or a candidate committee. And this bill seems to take into account their uniqueness in a way that isn't egregious or unreasonable. One of the things this bill does as well is it gives the organizations now the same reporting reminders that a filing is coming up. And we're currently able to do that with our PACs, with our candidate committees, or with our political parties, because we know who they are, and we can send notifications that say within 7 days you have a report that's due. And so by them forming, that gives us the ability to actually walk through the process with them so they meet their statutory filing obligations, as opposed to kind of being out there in limbo, not knowing if they're going to need to file or not. It allows us that ability to hold them accountable in a way to be helpful. Because at the end of the day, the report is going to be due, whether they form or not, whether this bill even goes forward or not, they still have to file. But this really does give us the opportunity to assist them with that. And again, making it more open and transparent. And if we, in this election year, if we receive phone calls like we've had in the past about specific ads that may depict a particular candidate in a positive or negative light, if we have any information that we can reach out to that organization on, then we can call and let them know, hey, here, this is the new law. There's, a threshold of $1,000. If what your activity is above that threshold, you need to form, and subsequently you need to file during that election. So it'll give us that ability to reach out to them, get them into the system, by CFIS, if you will, so that we can again get them those reminders, help them with their filings. There's one complication though I did want to bring to the committee's attention. It's on page 14. And it begins on line 4. It's the 22-25-108, the failure of persons to file reports, notice, penalties, and reconsideration. There's some added language in here that beginning on line 7, any person required to file a report or statement under 22-25-101. That's the section again that's about formation. And further down, it says that our office, as well as the clerks, are supposed to notify them of filings that are coming up. And even further, beginning on line 22, it gets into the administrative orders that we're supposed to send to them if they haven't yet formed. And the issue with that is that we have no idea if they need to form. We don't know we can't notify them. In other words, we cannot meet the letter of this law as written. There's just no way to do it. So we'd be in non-compliance with this law if we had to notify people to form that we don't even know who they are or what the contact information they have for us to even reach them. And so I don't know if this is appropriate time or not, but would certainly ask the committee to consider just removing that language of statement and that reference to 22-25-101 throughout the 22-25-108 section within this bill. With that, I would answer any questions the committee would have.
So Mr. Schoen, did you have an amendment, or it's just kind of unworkable and you'd like that section taken out? I missed maybe just a bit of your speech.
Sure. Oh,
you want it removed? Okay. Committee questions for the state election director. Not seeing any right now, Mr. Schoen. Don't go too far. We'll take some public comment. Oh. County clerks, anything on House Bill 49?
Mr. Chairman, Mary Langford, representing county clerks. County clerks support the bill. We don't have any issues with it, and we're okay. Nothing.
Any questions for the county clerks while I have them up? Representative Roscoe? You just have that look like you want to ask a question, so.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since you called on me, I will come up with something. it does seem like we need an amendment in there somewhere. I just couldn't figure out exactly how to phrase it. We could, maybe we could get a little help from the Secretary of State's office on, yeah.
All right, no other questions from Ms. Langford or the county clerks? Okay, is there anyone in the waiting room online?
Mr. Chairman, no one has a hand raised.
Okay. Any further public comment from anyone in the audience? Okay, Representative Duncan, before we close public comment, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Schoen, just to go back to your amendment on page 14, line 8, is that what you're wanting to remove? Is the 22, the reference to 22-25-101?
Mr. Shum.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Duncan, that is one of them. I'm also suggesting on line 7 above where it adds or statement. And that's all throughout. It keeps adding statement, and that's in reference to their statement of formation. And so I think anywhere where it says statement, that could go away, as well as the reference to 22-25-101, which points to the statement of formation. And so where it says or statement on line 7, as well as line 8, 22-25-101 or, and then again on line 11 or statement, end of line 16 or beginning of line 17 statement, line 20 or statement, and just those conforming amendments throughout it.
Okay, and follow up. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And Kai, what about line 23, same page, or statements?
Correct. Yep, as well there, because that deals with the administrative orders. And so I don't think that it needs to be there. We can't fulfill that.
Okay, and Mr. Chairman, continuing over down on 15, page 15, down to line 15, it says or statement, and then line 20 or statement. So everywhere where it says or statement, you want us to remove.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Duncan, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Representative, do you have a question?
Well, just a comment. This is amending existing language. So if we remove that, and we're not amending that, so that section can be stricken from the bill.
Right.
Oh, true.
That it would just come out of the legislation as it moved over to the Senate.
On page 15, line 12 would still have to stay in because there's other language there.
Mm-hmm. And at the appropriate time, if that amendment gets moved, Barb, I will make sure you have we're on the same page. Any other public comment to come before us on House Bill 49? Not seeing any, we will close public comment at this time. Committee, what's your pleasure on House Bill 49? Moved by Air, seconded by Duncan. Any amendments, committee? Representative Duncan.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to jump into the Secretary of State's amendment, starting on page 14, line 7. After the word report, the new language or statement, strike. Line 8, the new language, we want to strike 22-25-101 or. Down on line 11, we want to strike the new language or statement. Down on line 16, we want to strike the new language or. Line 17, we want to strike the new language statement. And line 20, we want to strike the new language or statement. And I believe we still want to strike on line 23 or statements, correct? And I believe we want to continue over onto line 15. Page 15, line 15. Oh, sorry. Are you following me, Barb? Okay, up on line 14, after the word report, strike or statement. Down on line 15, strike or statement. And then down on 20, strike or statement. And 19 or statement. And I believe that's all unless someone else caught one.
Clifford or Representative LeBeau is going to second that. I think that was the second, not the question. All right, make sure Barb, you got or statement out of there on every line. Okay. Any questions, committee, on that amendment? You do have a question. Go ahead, Representative.
Rather than striking or statement, we're striking all the new language in this section of the statute that's being amended. So we can just, that doesn't have to be in the bill any longer.
Right.
That whole section.
Pretty much,
It's
Barb,
already
you
in the
just,
existing statute and we're not changing the existing statute. So
there's a little bit on
on
page
page
15,
15,
but yeah,
that's
page
true,
14 can go. LSO will catch that. Representative Duncan could have made it easier and just said, take out all of A and all of F, but no, Barb enjoyed going through line by line. She's still smiling about it. All right, any further tests or discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, question been called. All in favor of the amendment, please say aye.
aye.
Opposed, say no. That amendment is passed. We are back on House Bill 49. Further amendments or discussion, committee? Seeing no further discussion or amendments and question being called, Barb, if you would call the roll on House Bill 49.
Representative Blackburn.
Aye.
Representative Clausen. Representative Duncan. Vice Chairman Air.
Aye.
Representative Burt. Representative McGuire voted aye. Absentee. Representative Roscoe. Representative LeBeau. Chairman Zwanitzer.
Aye.
9 ayes.
Committee, we're gonna have Representative Duncan floor manage House Bill 49. And so Mr. Schoen, if you're still listening, you might send an email to Representative Duncan and just make sure she has your notes and anything you'd like set on the floor or anything you could do to assist her. We'd be super appreciative. All right. With that, committee, we have one more bill before us. It's House Bill 80, Campaign Report Amendments. We still do have the Secretary of State's office with us online. And I know Mr. Schoen, this is a very short bill, but if you could refresh us on page 2, lines 11 and 12, why we're deleting the language and increasing a fine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House, again, Kai Schoen, State Election Director in the Secretary of State's office. House Bill 80, as you've already stated, it is a very simple bill, striking that language on page 2, lines 11 and 12. And the reason for this is that it really just cleans up the ambiguity for newly formed PACs and candidate committees as to whether or not they need to file a statement of contributions or expenditures. Because the language that you see stricken there, it says that PACs and candidate committees which expend any funds in an election essentially shall file an itemized statement. And so by practice, we have candidate committees and political action committees that whether they have contributions or expenditures, whether they've expended any funds or not, they have filed historically always, indicating it by either putting zeros on the report or now through YCFIS for our statewide PACs and committees, they check a box that says I have no contributions or expenditures to report. And so they're letting us know there's nothing to report. The reason why this became an issue was in 2020, due to the new enforcement provisions that we have for those that fail to file. We had a PAC that formed just prior to the general election in 2020, and they didn't file. And we were in the process of getting an administrative order together for them. And in reading the statute, we didn't know if we could send it to them or not, because we didn't know if they expended any funds at all. And we weren't able to reach the PAC. And it took about a good 6-7 months before we actually got some communication going. It turned out that they did have financial activity. They should have reported. And they were good about it. They ended up paying the civil penalty. They filed their report. But we would have been able to kind of move on this a bit sooner if this language wasn't there. And again, by practice, everybody's already doing this way. That's pretty much been the precedent. If you're an existing PAC or candidate committee, you're going to file. You're going to put on your contribution expenditures, or you'll check that box or put zeros on the report. So it just clears it up, makes it uniform in how we're able to apply the enforcement given to us in the statutes as well. In regards to the change on the last page, page 3, beginning on line 14, that was something that was added during one of the committee meetings in the interim. I don't remember the exact reasoning behind it other than to make it just a stiffer fine. I think this may have been in relation to organizations, possibly specifically to organizations. This bill and the last bill, House Bill 49, kind of got a bit confusing at one point. But if the intent was to make it more difficult on organizations that just aren't choosing to file, then maybe there's a better place for it. But here it applies to everybody, including any candidate that doesn't have a candidate committee. This $500 would apply. And so that's the best I can say about that. And I would answer any questions you might have.
Questions for the elections director? Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your last statement there just raised a red flag in me for me. So if a candidate, and some candidates may not even really understand that they need to file and they haven't had any expenditures, and would this impose a $500 per day fine on those people?
Mr. Schoen.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Bear, yes, that's how this reads, and that's what this does. What you don't see here is the provision that allows the entity to request reconsideration. So if they don't file that report, within the 21 days, they can request reconsideration. And so that civil penalty can be waived in specific instances when good cause is shown. But yes, you're right. That's how this reads. $500 per day for a candidate, committee PAC, anyone that's failed to file. And again, the final order, that happens 21 days after the filing deadline. So you have 3 weeks to get it filed. And then it's $500 per day when that order's delivered.
Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Schoen, you guys warn them, you let them know. And so they get plenty of warning, plus there's a grace period, correct?
Mr. Schoen, if you know.
Representative Duncan, absolutely. Yeah, I like to say we go above and beyond. Numerous phone calls, emails, trying to help everybody get filed. So yes, we do that.
Further questions from me? Seeing none at this time, Mr. Schoen, let's take public comment on House Bill 80. Anything from the county clerks? No, there's anyone online. You can probably let them in the room now. Go ahead, Ms. Langford.
Mr. Chairman, Mary Langford representing the county clerks. We support this bill. We have no issues. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions? Don't see any. Thank you. Anyone else here in the audience testify on House Bill 80? Seeing none. Anyone online? Let's bring
Mr.
them
Chairman,
on.
we do have one online.
Hey, Mr. Chestick, is it snowing in Laramie today? Welcome to Corporations. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And yes, it is snowing lightly here, but not a big deal. Although I did slip on some black ice this morning and yank my hamstring pretty good. So that's why I'm sitting here in my home office. I'm not able to walk very much. But anyway, I'm here to speak in favor of this bill. I'm here representing, my name is Ken Chestick. I'm representing Wyoming Promise. And this amendment was added, I think, at our request or our suggestion anyway, a comment that we had at one of your earlier meetings. And yes, Mr. Schoen, the intent was to penalize the organizations, the independent expenditure organizations that choose deliberately not to file their reports. The way the bill is worded, without the amendment, an independent organization can buy its way out of filing any kind of report by paying $500. And this was designed to prevent that from happening. And I do appreciate the Corporation Committee unanimously approving this. and taking this on as a committee bill. And again, we support it strongly. One last point, and then I'll be stand for questions. Interesting coincidence this morning, I opened up my email and got my weekly National Law Journal summary of what's going on in the world. And there was an article about a very similar law in New Mexico, a reporting requirement for organizations like these. That one organization challenged the law and arguing that it was a infringement on their First Amendment rights. It was taken up, the trial court dismissed the case, and the 10th Circuit agreed that the bill did not dismiss the bill. So these things have been challenged in court and have survived because Citizens United does give us the right to have transparency in campaign donations, campaign expenditures, and therefore I very strongly support this bill, and I'm happy to stand for questions.
Questions from Mr. Chesty? Not seeing any, Ken, but certainly thank you for testifying and helping House Bill 80 through the process.
Thank you.
Yep. Anyone else online? Seeing none and seeing no further testimony in the audience, we'll close public comment and committee your pleasure as on House Bill 80 to move the bill. Representative Blackburn, seconded by Air. Bill is on the table. Any discussion or amendments, committee? Anybody want to increase or decrease fines? Just check. All right. Seeing no further comment, Barb, if you'd call the roll.
Representative Blackburn. Representative Clausen. Representative Duncan. Chairman, Vice Chairman Air. Representative Burt. Representative McGuire voted aye by absentee. Representative Roscoe. Representative LeBeau. Chairman Swanitzer.
Aye.
9 ayes.
I think Vice Chairman Air will floor manage House Bill 80. If that's okay. Committee, I know we do have 2 bills, I believe, assigned to this committee from this morning. One is from blockchain. And so that'll be at Friday at lunch. Chairman Olson will be with us to present the blockchain committee insurance related bill. And I've heard that we'll have 4 or 5 more up tomorrow in introduction. So hopefully by noon tomorrow, you'll get a sense of what's going to be on our agenda, both Friday at noon, and then we need to have the Monday agenda at noon finalized pretty quickly as well. So I believe we did add about 35 or 40 new pieces of legislation to the website in the last hour. They're still coming in as bills were due at noon. So a couple interesting ones showed up for this committee. So, and a friendly reminder that redistricting will be on the floor here in about 30 minutes. I think Majority Floor Leader Summers is going to kick us off, followed by Representative Duncan, former committee member Representative Air or Representative Yin is going to do some of the data stuff and answer those type of questions. But committee, after all the work this interim, anything you can do to help the bill or answer our colleagues' questions about your areas or anything we went through over 6 months of back and forth. Sorry to make you relive some of that, but and they have been emailing me. We will have some giant screens in the chamber for the first time. And so we'll be able to have some maps on the wall and really kind of delve into specific areas. Mr. Swank will be online, zooming in, zooming out for us. So should be an exciting afternoon, and Representative Duncan has a rather significant 6-county amendment coming forward to the plan. It should be very familiar to many of us who've been on the committee. All right, with that, seeing no other business to come before the committee today, everything good, Barb? All right.